Innovate. Accelerate. Move technology forward. The startup revolution is now.
Since entering the new decade, businesses are enjoying lower overall IT spend by as much as 30%. More and more businesses are adopting new technology to keep up with the ever-changing demands of their customers. Welcome to Apper. Here, we help businesses adopt innovations on the cloud and build collaborative partnerships with our clients. We have worked with our trusted partners over the years to ensure hassle-free, efficient, and seamless implementation of technology. Are you ready to innovate on the cloud? Let's build your innovation roadmap together. Talk to us. Visit www.apper.ph to learn more. Apper.ph. Innovating with you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well, and thank you for showing up today in the Philippine Startup Week 2022. And I'm honored to be once again a speaker in this momentous event. Been supporting the PH Startup Week for many years now, and we will continue to do so. And what I want to share today is more of how to leverage the cloud, coming from a perspective of a startup entrepreneur. So, well, the title of the talk is Streamlining Cloud Computing Operations on the Cloud. I want to convey how to do it, how to do the streamlining as a journey. So I'll be doing more of a whiteboarding session this morning rather than the traditional slides we've been trying to do for the past several years. I felt like doing this whiteboarding session will help future tech entrepreneurs in the country better understand how they can leverage cloud computing platforms. Everything starts as a journey. Even future homegrown heroes that will be the future tech giant need to start with something, and I feel like that's a very important phase of the journey. The start, right? I've been in the industry for quite some time, so if I count, let's say, my very early years, started in the mid 2000s up to now. So more or less, I'm in the IT industry for almost 15 years, and throughout my career, I saw the growth of cloud computing, and realizing that cloud computing has been a major pillar, a major foundation of a lot of digital innovations globally. I think it's fair to say that if you're planning to be in the industry, in the tech industry, or you're planning to launch a digital innovation, you really need to understand cloud computing. But practically, all of the things that you see on your mobile app now are powered by cloud services, right? So from the movies that you watch on your favorite streaming video, or the apps that they use to pay for your, let's say, food or lunch, right? All of them run on top of the cloud. And this happened practically during the 2010s, the rise of cloud computing, and platforms such as Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft Azure, Alibaba Cloud. All of these CSPs made it possible. Now, practically, if you're going to start from scratch now, all of the things that you need to build meaningful digital innovations and platforms are all available for you. It's just a matter of using them. So I want to share how to approach it if you're starting from scratch, because you have the benefit of leapfrogging or starting to the best practices from the get-go. And essentially, when you're starting a company, it's like a blank canvas, right? So everything is still good, everything is still smooth, right? There are no issues, there are no problems that you need to solve. There are no firefighting, right? So if you think about it, that's the best time to do things the right way. The reason why I'm telling this is we work with a lot of customers in Apper, right? So we work with like the top digital startups, top digital fintechs in the country, to the biggest telcos, to the top conglomerates in the country. So um, one thing I realized that a lot of the things, that prevents innovations from coming out um, are caused um, are caused by blockers, right? So usually you have these blockers. It could be legacy technology or legacy process or some sort of hindrance, no, to make something come out. Now you don't have that problem if you're starting your business or you're starting a startup, because you can start from scratch. You can start and do the right things. So so let me draw here you as the startup founder. As a startup founder, essentially you have a lot of things on your mind, right? You might be thinking about, all right, your product or service, and that could give you a lot of questions on your mind. Okay, uh, is this something people or customers want? Whatever that you're offering, or my competitors, or is it even something needed in the market? For most cases, you need to look at the technology side of things. Of course, if you're into the digital space, definitely you need to have some sort of touch point that is digital to reach your customers. Could be an application, a mobile application, could be a website, could be a service, right? So that's something also that will help, that will kind of like drive your decision points, right? The technology platform. And of course, you also need to think about operations. So once you establish or create your product or service, then you also need to think about the operations. How do you run it? How do you make sure that you can deliver it scalably and consistently, right? So usually a lot of these things are, if you're starting up, you don't think about it at the start, but eventually you need to think about it. Otherwise, once you reach a certain point, once you have, let's say, paying customers, it's going to be hard to retrofit a lot of the things if you haven't considered them when you start. So, as a startup entrepreneur, there's a lot of things. So I want to focus on in the next several minutes on the tech side of things, because it will kind of affect the other pillars for product and services and also operations. So specifically, since I've been talking about the cloud, I want you to understand the role of the cloud in your tech strategy. So you'll see here that the tech, essentially, the cloud becomes your platform, your footing in terms of how you will execute your business. Now, okay, now that we have established that the cloud becomes your platform, your foundation for your digital business, what could what's let me take it back. So what is the cloud exactly, right? So if you're, let's say, new into the into tech, or you're a non-tech founder, you might be wondering what is the cloud exactly. So usually we give this in Apra, we give this a very long half-day session for executives or even startup founders regarding the cloud. But I'll give you the short version, the shortcut now to better understand it. So let me show you first how it will work without the cloud. Right? So before the cloud became important or became popular, so imagine this was around the 2000s. So let's say you want to build a social networking site, or even a video streaming site like YouTube or social media. You have things like Facebook, right? So previously, when you want to do a digital service or a digital application, you need to go have physical servers, right? So servers. So essentially, these are machines, right, that perform the computation, storage of your service or application. So what will happen is that you have your technology group or technology team that will write the application, and they need to put the code into this set of servers, right? So previously, during this period, you need to have people specifically to set up these servers, right? So you need to have a separate set of infrastructure people, network engineers, right, to set up the physical servers and connect them together. And of course, you need to have network connectivity in the internet that could be provided by a telco company that will provide you the actual physical link to their network to be able to connect to the worldwide internet. So imagine this, right? So it means that in order to start the service or the business, you need to set up this one, and this requires a lot of capital expenditures. So that's very expensive and requires a lot of effort. Now, let's try to look at it from a perspective that you're starting on the cloud. So you don't need to think about the physical hardware and the network connectivity. So what will happen here? So recall that you as a startup entrepreneur is setting up your business, and of course you need to have your developers, right, to implement your application. So you don't need to think about the physical infrastructure anymore and the network connectivity. So the cloud service providers or CSP essentially provide you that service, that facility. So everything, instead of having physical servers, think of it as you're having virtual servers. So your servers are all on the cloud. So you don't need to think about it. You don't need to procure. You don't need to buy them, right? You just need to use them. So when I say using them, so essentially it kind of changes the model from a capital-intensive endeavor towards a more operationally intensive endeavor. So from a finance point of view, you're moving the expenditures towards an operational expenditure or OPEX. So think of it just like your electricity, right? So you use electricity, then you get a bill at the end of the month, and you pay for it. So that's the same principle in cloud computing, right? So everything becomes something that you use and pay for it after the billing period. So how does it affect you as a digital business? So it simplifies and minimizes your execution strategy, because what you need to think now is to focus on the product and operational aspects of your business rather than thinking about the infrastructure. So you can use your budget to hire the developers who will implement your service, and they can just focus on writing your application, making it better, rather than thinking about, let's say, okay, how do we create infrastructure to support, let's say, the projected number of users after this X months or X years, right? So all of that capacity planning goes away, and you can focus on building the application. And as your tech team starts developing your application, they can focus more on giving value rather than thinking about things that are not core into your business. So essentially, that is the essence of the cloud, right? So it gives you the virtual infrastructure that will allow you to really focus on building your infrastructure and application. Okay, so since that is established, so just to give you like a short history of what happened during the 2010s, AWS, so Amazon Web Services, is the first cloud computing platform. They practically defined the industry, and the other tech giants eventually followed through, right? So Amazon started AWS 2006. But as someone who was involved in the industry for quite some time, it really grew during the 2010s. Like I could still remember when I first attended the AWS re:Invent conference in the mid 2010s. just okay. The conference just reserved one hotel in Las Vegas, with only a few thousand attendees. The last time I was there back in 2019, pre-pandemic, almost 70,000 people attending, and practically the conference reserved the entire, almost all of the major hotels in the Las Vegas Strip, right? So it means that it's really huge. The way I see 2010s is more of companies and businesses realizing the potential of the cloud and making it as a de facto like option when you're starting a business, right? So the question of whether you use the cloud is, I think it's not relevant anymore now in the 2020s. You need to build on the cloud from the get-go, right? So that's a key transition point from the 2010s to the 2020s. Of course, the maturity of the cloud also increased a lot in the 2010s, right? So typically, when you talk about cloud, and I'm sure if you're in the industry, it's something that you might have already, right? Virtual servers, storage, object storage, and so on and so forth, right? So typically, it's the talk about cloud is all about the virtual infrastructure, right? The virtual servers that will run your application or the databases that will store your data. Well, it's still true. I think that's way past the what the businesses need now in the 2020s. I think it is something that shouldn't be. It's not that I'm saying that we shouldn't talk about it, but there are a lot of better options, right? And so from the what we call the infrastructure as a service, you have more powerful options now. Of course, a platform as a service, right? And other higher level capabilities on the cloud. So normally, if you're creating your startup now, I would advise you to go on the higher level services and not think about servers anymore. So the key point here is that you need to make the right choices now. Do not wait for your startup to get traction in order to go to the, let's say, to implement the best practices or choose the right strategy. That's something I also noticed with a lot of customers or companies that we have talked to in the past several years, right? For most cases, you want to really focus on building your companies or startups core value, right? And sometimes it results to pushing back certain decisions, right? So for example, there might be a solution to simplify your technology operations, but due to time limitations, usually this automation or these decisions gets pushed back. And usually what will happen after a couple of years, once your startup gets traction, you have this technical debt that is very expensive to solve. So I want you to think about really leveraging the best practice in the cloud from the get-go. That will help you automate and streamline your operations rather than use the cloud head first, implement things that, let's say, that your organization is accustomed to. Say if your organization is used to a certain way of doing things and apply it in the cloud, usually that's not the best way to go. And usually that result to more expenses later on, right? So in order to really streamline your operations in the cloud, you need to think of your infrastructure as software, right? So don't think about virtual infrastructure as something that needs to be like set up manually, right? Because in the physical world, of course, it's different, right? There are physical servers that you need to move, you need to set up, you need to manually fix, right? Now, when things become virtual, everything is software, and since they're software, it means they're programmable and automatable, right? So what you should be thinking about is automation. So you should ask your tech team, or if you're a CTO of the startup, your engineers, to really do automation from the get-go. So why is it important? It's important because you will gain the efficiencies as you grow. So at the start, giving you it could be a hurdle if you don't have the experience, because it will take some time to know the cloud if you work with let's say engineers who don't have the experience, right? So there's a learning curve. Like, it could be steep at the start, but as you go along, right, the efficiencies could go a long way, right? So difficulty is higher, right? But you gain more efficiencies as time goes by. Difficulty also becomes lower, because as you gain experience, things will be better for you. If you do automation, then a lot of the things that done manual can be done by a machine. So, given that, if you automate and invest at the start, right? Automation gives you savings in the future. If you do things manually, essentially it's technical debt. And technical debt is essentially money. So you could be spending more than what you're supposed to be paying, because let's imagine that, okay, you start, let's say, a certain service, and use virtual servers to host the application and data. If you don't automate it, then you need to have people, right, who will manually manage them or set it up. And as you grow your business, then you need to put more servers, virtual servers on the cloud, right? That means money, and also some money that you pay to the cloud service provider, and also money to hire the people to fix them. And as a startup, of course, that's something that is limited for you, right? So you don't have the luxury unless you really, let's say, raise a lot of money, or you have the capacity to really pay for it. And for most cases, you don't have that luxury. And we've seen a lot of startups go through this trap, because I understand it's kind of seducing to do things, launch it, diba? Launch it the fastest way possible, or by hook or by crook, you launch it on a certain date. But what I found out is that launching it without thinking about how it will grow will usually be more painful in the long run. As I mentioned, you need to spend a lot of things to fix it. And I think things are more understood now, right? In terms of technology, strategies, implementation. Things are more mature now compared to, let's say, 2010s. So there's no excuse really to do things the incorrect way, or the not so best practices way. So what you want to do when you think about your service, when you're launching it, is to really think about how you will scale it from a technology point of view. So I can give you some points on how to do this. So these advices are something that we give to our customers, something that we have learned working with customers. So I'll keep it like simple for you to understand as a startup founder. Okay, so the first one is to establish cloud fluency. So establish cloud fluency in your organization. So what does it mean? So it means that it means that your technology team or technical team needs to have the cloud competency to really use. They need to know how to use the cloud. So it comes for the tech. It also requires your finance team to really understand the model of the cloud. So what does it mean, right? Most of the cases. So let me go deeper into this finance. Why your finance managers or CFO need to understand the cloud, right? Just recall that the cloud computing model shifted the finances from a capital heavy model into an operational model, right? It's more of OPEX. Now, to save money, you need to make sure that you don't spend more than you should. So, what we've seen in the industry working with customers is a lot of the companies are actually overpaying their cloud subscription, and usually there's a huge amount of wastage, right? So let's say, so let me show you this graph, right? So you have the usage, right? So it goes something like that. But in the reality, it's something that you only need to pay for, let's say, or something like this. So that delta or the difference in your usage and this and your actual, you're supposed to um, pay, given that if you do things the right way, make it more efficient, it's a substantial amount of money for a startup, right? Now, from a finance point of view, this is something that usually surprises the startup, right? Because they get a bill, let's say from AWS or from the CSP, and they're very shocked with how much they're paying monthly, right? And usually that's the disconnect between the tech and the finance, right? And usually finance will go to the tech team and say, "Oh, hey, how come our bill is going up, or how come this is too expensive," and so on and so forth, right? So it means that in order to facilitate that communication, your finance team also need to have a better understanding of the cloud, especially its operational model. There are also ways to save money by upfronting payments. So there are variants of this. Sometimes you call it reserve, savings plans, and all of these facilities in the CSP that will allow you to save around 20-30% of your annual bill if you prepay a certain amount, right? It's also a good way to challenge and also work with your tech team to revisit the usage, right? So for most cases, wastage also come from, let's say, unused resources. It happens a lot, right? So for example, if your tech team has a multiple application environments for, let's say, development, staging, production, right? They need to use cloud resources, and for most cases, these non-production cloud resources don't get turned off, which essentially causes higher expenditures. So if your finance team can understand these concepts, these things, right, that will help you better give like some sort of check and balance between the tech and finance. Right? At the same time, of course, the tech needs to understand, aside from the technical side of things, they need to understand the finance side, right? For most cases, tech people just use resources, right? I think primarily that control, right, is given to the tech people rather than on the finance people. I think that's a huge difference compared to the older traditional model of buying infrastructure. Because when you buy infrastructure, right, you need to have it approved by the procurement team or the CFO. So you have that level of control in the finance world. Now it's the other way around. The tech people can just provision resources. They can provision, let's say, 100 servers, right? And if they forget to turn it off, then all of a sudden, their $1,000 bill becomes, let's say, 10,000. So as a finance person, you'll be really be surprised because you don't know where to get this budget, or if you haven't provisioned enough buffer in your annual budget, then that's a huge problem, right? So these things happen. It's a regular thing that happen uh, with customers, and I think if you really think about it, it's all about that cloud fluency, right? It needs to be understood by the people working in the startup, and you as a startup founder definitely really need to understand this, right? So this is very important because it allows you to forecast your capitalization requirements, how much money do you need to raise, or if you're bootstrapping your startup, how much leeway you have, runway you have left, right? So this is practically the most important advice that I could give you. Really establish cloud fluency from the get-go. Okay, well, we move to the next advice, which is the automation. Since we're talking about the streamlining, right? You can think of it as automation essentially is investment that you need to have, and in terms of time, and also this is something, a competency, no, that your tech team needs to have. So think of it as an investment and also a competency. So investment in the sense that, of course, as a startup founder, you always want everything to launch, right? Of course, I also worked for startups before, prior to starting Apper, and I could understand, right? Practically all the startup founders I worked for, once everything launched yesterday, or a week or a month from now, and usually that pressure to launch, right? That results to the cutting of corners, and usually that's a problem, right? So it means that, okay, maybe you can invest 1 or 2 weeks, delay the launch in 1 to 2 weeks to, let's say, automate the provisioning of your cloud infrastructure, or automate certain tasks, right? That will help you scale faster. And usually for most startup founders, it's a very hard decision to have, right? Because you always have this mindset, always launch as soon as possible. But again, if you from what I have discussed a while ago, there's always something that there's always a consequence, right? If you do things incorrectly at the start, then there's always technical debt in the future. So when you invest your time and money the right way, it could be cheaper. Most likely, it will be cheaper in the long run. So what do you need to invest on? So invest on automated deployments. So it means that if your tech team is doing deployments manually, then that's something that is not advisable. It means that things are done manually, which essentially developer time, which equates to money. However, if you try to invest time to do the deployments automated by, let's say, a CI/CD pipeline, then you can save money in the long run because things are automated and you can deploy features faster. Infrastructure is another important aspect. So for your developers, you need to ask them to do things on an automated way, right? It also ties to the competency, right? So most of the time when you develop your application or service, you think about the customer facing side of things, right? The user experience, the UI, right? So that makes sense, right? But at the same time, you also need to think about the back-end side of things, right? Because of course, you want the best UX designers, UI designers, to make sure that you have a good product, a good-looking product. At the same time, it's something that you also need to take or watch out for at the back end. So the competency of your tech team to do cloud deployments, automated infrastructure, right, needs to be there. It's very important because otherwise you again fall into this trap of doing things manually, and after a few years you end up with this bloated mess in terms of the back end. The reason it's good to do it now because all of the tools are easier and more mature now compared to the 2010s. So I don't think there's no reason to really not do the right way these days, especially if you're starting. So aside from the automated deployments, infrastructure, security is also very important. So let me share some stories. When I started my career as a software developer for probably the first social media network. So I worked for this social media company. They closed down. They're defunct now. Facebook practically took over. So I was working for them as part of their Philippine team back in the 2000s, and back then there are no like data privacy. There are no concepts of data privacy. I do remember that our database, which has more than 20 million users, which is a lot back then. All of the email and passwords are just in clear text. So I still remember that because I do recall that. So we were assigned company machines, company laptops back then, and all of us developers have copies of the database dump. Right, 20 million users are all stored individually in each of our computers, so we can develop locally. So nowadays it's not acceptable. Back then, I mean, there's no standard. So it's quite sad to know that, because it means that if the company that that hosts your data, right, don't do the right way, then practically just giving your data or sensitive secrets, right? But now things are well understood. There are laws now that protects the rights of people, yeah, for the data, for their data. Right? So security becomes an important concern for your startup. So what happened in the past several years? So practically, because of it's kind of connected to the concept of cloud fluency. Because a lot of technical people or developers working on the cloud don't have the right training, don't have the right certifications, or even the right mindset towards the cloud. It opened up a lot of security vulnerabilities. For most cases, there are no what do you call this? There are no. So let me backtrack. To illustrate the point, I think I need to discuss with you the concept of shared responsibility in the cloud. So I mentioned that the cloud service providers or CSPs like AWS, GCP, right? They're practically providing you the infrastructure for the physical and network connectivity. So they're essentially protects or manages the security of the cloud. And you, as a customer, so your startup, is responsible for protecting the data. So AWS won't be liable, let's say, if your database or your object storage folder gets exposed to the public. So it means that as a cloud customer, right, you need to make sure that you know how to protect data on the cloud. Since things are not physical anymore, you need to make sure that you understand how to protect the data within the cloud, right? And that revolves around doing the right access control. Right? So all of these are available as tools provided by the CSP. And for the most case, most customers don't know how to use it correctly. And there are a lot of horror stories in the past 5 to 8 years regarding this. For most of the cases, let's say you have this object storage folder that contains sensitive data, personally identifiable information of your customers. They get exposed. Yes, I think that's a key difference. When you have physical infrastructure, you think about it physically, right? So physical servers. Okay, you put access control, you put it in a safe part of the building or even a data center that has the control to physically protect the data. When you move to the cloud, things become virtual, right? So that usually that becomes a problem because people are still trying to think of it right differently. So let's say you have this object storage folder that contains the data of your customers, right? And someone in your company accidentally set it to be publicly accessible. So that exposes data of your customers, which makes you liable, right? So the key here is that we need to have the right processes, right? Or you can even automate the security of your cloud environment. There are tools that will allow you to detect, let's say, if let's say a certain object storage bucket or a database gets exposed to the public, or if your developers are using access control credentials that get exposed, all of them can be automated, right? The detection and remediation can get automated by tools. So this becomes very important because, again, you're a startup founder. You want things get out of get you want them to be launched, to be accessed by your customers, and security is something that you don't think about at the start, right? And I think usually that's the problem. Again, you put it at the backlog or some in your I guess in the bottom of your prioritization, and usually it gets bumped up if things get into, let's say, if you get into trouble. Basically, someone accidentally published the passwords or the addresses or contact information, or let's say the government IDs of your customers. And that's the time, diba? It becomes important. So what we're saying here is that if you have this mindset of automation, you can prevent these things from happening, right? So that's the second advice I would give. So on the last advice, I want to discuss more of the cost, right? So as a startup founder, of course, your resources are limited, and you might again, if you don't know how to do things correctly on the cloud, you might end up paying for so much more. So I'll give you some tips on how to do this if you're starting from scratch. First is don't think about servers anymore. You ask your developers to use technologies such as serverless or cloud native, specifically containers. The reason for this is that it will allow you to scale your compute infrastructure without thinking about servers. On the data side, you can also use things like serverless databases or purpose-built databases. So let's say if you're projecting to, let's say, to have 1 million concurrent users, you need to have the right architecture for that, and that involves choosing the right database to support your application. So there are ways to architect it properly, and you don't even need to spend so much money. Would you believe that you can support, let's say, an application that could have millions of users monthly, hundreds of thousands concurrent users for just maybe $1,000 or even less? So that's possible, but you need to do it the right way. So you need to have the right architecture to do that, right? And practically, it's really leveraging the cloud as a platform. So for most cases, the reason why startups and organizations are having a hard time scaling is because they're using the old paradigms, old technologies to do things on the cloud. And while that it's technically possible, it usually is essentially money. Diba? You need to understand that in order to really use the cloud as efficient as possible from a cost perspective, you need to write architectures, right? Think about pay as you use, right? Paying per request instead of paying 24/7, right? Instead of paying for a virtual database for 24/7, just pay per request, right? If you're a startup, diba? You're a startup, usually only have a few users, so there's no sense for you to provision a database that runs 24/7. Probably you can use a database that is more usage based rather than procuring something that just runs 24/7 and that costs money. So the right architecture essentially will give you cost efficiencies. So that practically outlines the strategies in order for your startup to grow scalably on the cloud. So let me recap very briefly. So there are just 3 things to streamline your operations and scale it. So the first advice is to establish cloud fluency. explicitly, especially on your tech and finance groups. Number two would be automation. So this requires investment on automated deployments, automated provisioning of your infrastructure, and of course, investing in competency, right? You need to make sure that you have the right competencies in order to do the provisioning, and also, of course, security on the cloud. I also briefly talked about the separation of the responsibilities between the customer, cloud customer, which is you, startup, and the cloud service providers. And lastly, the cost efficiency, which is very important for startups. Again, don't think about servers anymore. I think if your tech team are still thinking about databases, servers, right, you might want to revisit that. There are a lot of options now. Think about serverless, cloud native platforms, containers, right? All of this will give you better efficiencies from a cost perspective. And of course, doing the right architecture from day one. I think that's really critical for startups. Don't try to do just get it out. It won't work anymore. I think it's 2020s. It's really, just do the right thing from the get-go. You'll save a lot of money moving forward. So there. So, well, if these things, if you need help about these things, let's say if you need to revisit your architecture, or you need advice on how to structure your startup, right, from an organization and tech point of view, we'll be happy to help you in Apper. We have a lot of experience in this field. We help the top digital startups in the country, top conglomerates, and we'll be happy to share you what we know. And hopefully this cloud computing operations talk will help you in your success as the next homegrown heroes, and hopefully your startup will be considered as a future tech giant in the country. Okay, thank you, and maraming salamat po.